So if you were to guess, how many K through 12 students do you think there are in the United States? Well, the number is well over 50 million. 50 million kids are attending public, private, and charter schools across the country this year. Homeschooling is said to be about 3.5 million students spread in total 131,000 schools nationwide. Now, in general, the percentage of K-12 students in the US population is between 14.5% to 16.5%, depending on which organization produces these numbers. But it's fair to say that for OEMs, PC vendors, tablet vendors, etc., this is a huge market. Some time ago, I did some research work for Apple on this market, and I can say that without any hesitation that the K-12 market is critical, not only because of the money involved with federal and state funding behind it, but because that period in the life of a kid is considered as a critical period in brand marketing. In other words, computer vendors and tablet makers like to have their logos in front of the kids as early as possible. Ed News Daily estimates the technology market for K-12 education in the United States was worth approximately $35.8 billion in 2020. Business Research Insights calculate that market to grow by a compound annual growth rate of some 21.28% from 2021 to 2031. This is clearly a huge market that the likes of Google, Apple, Dell, HP, Lenovo, and many others have never neglected. But what about the recycling phase of that technology? What happens to those devices after they are used for between 3 to 5 years? Well, I had a fantastic hour discussion with Garry VonMyhr of Tech Defenders, a company up in Michigan that has had a laser-focused attention on the K-12 IT asset disposition sector. And I learned a lot. For example, most of what we know about proper IT asset disposition practices are often not the norm in schools. A poorly understood ITAD is only further amplified by a lack of budgets, which makes school more interested in cost and eventually how much could they make selling their retired devices into the secondary market to make extra cash. Now, some of that mentality is obviously changing, but can you imagine those millions of devices and a poor recycling pipeline? I also learned that the Chromebook is king. Having helped Apple assess that market some years ago, I'm surprised to see that the Chromebook has made significant strides. But the trend is not surprising. Chromebooks come at much lower prices, and Apple, still with a decent double-digit market share in K-12, is a premium product, a status that prevents it from growing too much share in a budget-sensitive sector. I started by asking Garry to take us to the start of his venture some decade ago.
Right out of college, it was 2010, and the economy was not in a great spot. Remember, obviously, mortgage crisis and everything else. I had a background in finance. I always loved the idea of being an entrepreneur, but didn't know what that was really about. We didn't have any entrepreneurs in my family, really. But I had a friend of mine come to me with a business idea to actually fix phones, to start fixing iPhones. His name's Jordan Notenbaum. And so we started a little business while we were in college in 2009, 2010, fixing iPhones, mostly just iPhone screens, a little bit of iPods. Blackberries actually were pretty popular. Did a lot of Blackberry trackball repairs. Those were always pretty sweet because they were like 2 seconds to pop in and out, and it was like $25, and the cost was really low. So we started with a phone repair out of his house, and then it progressed into a business called Genius Phone Repair, which we ended up opening retail locations throughout Michigan and Indiana. We had 18 of them that were doing repair on mobile devices. And it was a successful business, but kind of saw the writing on the wall that it was going to be really hard to scale that business. And there was a lot of competition coming into the phone repair industry, a lot of mom and pop shops opening, kind of felt like a race to the bottom from a price standpoint and competition. So we started seeing an opportunity to work with school districts, and this was back in 2012, 2013, and you'd actually find me working, up front in customer service as well as managing the store and all the other responsibilities we have as small business owners, right? But I remember somebody coming in. It was a parent of a student, and it was a cracked iPad, and on the back it said property of Zeeland Public Schools. And so I thought, man, I know these schools have a lot of devices, but then I did start doing some research, and I realized, Zeeland had thousands of these devices, and they were trying to go one device per student, a full one-to-one program, one of the first schools to do that with iPads. And then I'm like, wow, we could fix a lot of devices, assuming these kids aren't going to take good care of them. And then we found out too, they didn't have hardly any cases. They just had those like folio cases that went over the top that really didn't protect them at all. So I knew those things were going to break a lot. So I kind of had dollar signs in my eyes of seeing how many repairs that we may be able to do for the school district. And so we started doing like a milk run for that school district where we drop off the working devices and pick up the broken ones. And we would do 15, 20, 30 repairs in a week, which was, a huge revenue boost to our store. And so we branched off that business and called it Tech Defenders later on, just to really focus on that K-12 industry and the growing repair capabilities, or the repair needs, that I should say, that industry was, those schools were going to clearly have, because they had to fix those devices. They're too important for the student. They needed those devices. It was an investment for the school, but it was a must-have, considering everything students are doing on these devices these days. So that's kind of what brought us into the education market. And then when it came time for Zeeland and some of the other schools we were working with to get rid of those devices, we started to see a big opportunity to buy them back. Originally, it was a lot of Apple devices, and we thought we'd have a kind of an advantage with our ability to fix the broken ones as well, right? So we can take back the working ones, data wipe them, clean them, refurbish them, resell them, but then the broken ones, we could also fix and resell those. And so that's kind of what brought us into really the ITAD business. We did a little bit of that work early on when we first started, but then we really decided to go all in at being an ITAD business, really focused on reuse of buying back fleets out of the education sector. And we started to get some business accounts as well, larger businesses that had fleets too. But our primary focus is definitely on the K-12 education sector, where we're taking back fleets all the way from 500 to 20 or 25,000 devices at a time.
And to get there, I would assume you had the technical background from college or university.
Well, I actually studied finance.
Okay.
My dad is in IT, and he's a director at a large organization here. So I've always had IT in my family, but we were able to just kind of figure out a lot of stuff on our own early on. A lot of YouTube videos, a lot of learning, and then we got to a spot where we were able to hire some really smart people, a lot of smart technical minds, and so we relied on them and picked up enough from them over time. So we've just kind of figured it out. We weren't very good at first, I'll tell you. You could ask my partner. We used to glue iPad screens shut, with super glue. That was our first way of doing it. But as you could imagine, if you left a speck of dust under the screen, it could be a problem to get that device back opened up. So that strategy didn't last too long, but we learned quick and made modifications, and then started hiring some of the right people to help us out.
Well, you also confirmed to me that there is a reason why the number two guy in very large corporations tends to be the CFO, right? Having a financial background absolutely plays a huge role in steering the company in the right place, because you have the visibility in the numbers. And without that, it's very difficult to run a business. So if you could situate where the company is located.
So we're in the Midwest here in Michigan. We're on the west side of Michigan. We're only about 30 or 40 minutes away from Lake Michigan. So if you know where Chicago is, we're about 2.5 hours, 3 hours to the northeast of Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
You got to just drive right around the lake and up, and there we are. So we do a lot of work in, definitely Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, in the Midwest region. But we do work all across the U.S. Wherever there's larger takeouts, we'll send our team down and do them. So we'll go over to Florida and California, down to doing a lot in Texas. So we tend to work with some pretty good sized school districts really all over the US, and then a lot of medium sized schools throughout the Midwest as well. We're in that small medium sized range. We have a little over 100 team members in total. And
Good
then we
size.
do, yeah, oh yeah, yeah. We'll do about between 350 and 400,000 devices this year. So just to give you an idea of size, and like I said, between Chromebooks, iPads, MacBooks, some phones, some Surfaces, those are kind of our niche. A lot of kind of education devices that we're really strong in.
So, company you said is how many years now? A decade, a little over a decade?
Yeah, yeah. So really the idea was, I would say, probably in 2012, where we really started doing some work with
Okay.
schools. And then the business was officially formed in 2015. So just under 10 years now.
No. The numbers that you shared suggest to me that you have a pretty decent size operation. Uh, you mentioned in the beginning that your focus has largely been, still is, the K-12 education sector. So it's a very precise segment of the market. As you're trying to go into other industries or other verticals, what's your concern in terms of the way you would approach new segments compared to what you've learned in the K-12 sector? I'm asking this question is because I've always been an advocate of segmentation and focusing on vertical market separately, because the way a buyer in K-12 thinks will be extremely different the way a buyer in a healthcare sector would think or a financial sector would think. These are different mindsets driven by different drivers and inhibitors, different pressure points. Um, I guess the question is, if you were to deal with a plethora of different types of segments, do you approach them the same way or do they think differently?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, they definitely think differently, to your point. There's no doubt about it. Schools in this market tend to be very price focused. Whoever is going to help me get the most amount of money back, and that is clearly their number one priority. And especially right now with some state funding issues and budget constraints that are coming, and the lack of stimulus money, there many schools are definitely tighter on funds than they have been in several years,
Yeah.
certainly. So price is very much a focus there. In the enterprise sector, it's going to be about data security, right? I mean, that's going to be number one, and convenience and a good, solid program with a trustworthy brand. So unfortunately, schools don't care much about those other things, and it's just very much price focused. So I think the approach is definitely very different. I think our company tends to appeal more to a professional organization, a forward-thinking school, better, especially with our certifications, kind of professionalism, trust, and brand that we've tried to build. We try to really do things right, and do things right in the long term and not cut any corners. So for us, I think it's definitely a different sales and marketing strategy, and just better positioning of our uniques in a different way, more than having to recreate the business though. So that's the good thing for somebody like us as we approach these different markets. So I feel pretty strongly about how our uniques and differentiators will be perceived by that target client in those different verticals.
Let's go back to the education sector proper. Who is responsible for ITS at this position? In classic enterprise, you have an IT department that's doing so day-to-day operations. You have a number of watchdogs, the procurement folks, the compliance guys, all of those sort of keep an eye.
Mhm,
In theory, they keep an eye on the ITAD front. Uh,
mhm.
it how is it structured in education?
Yeah, it's fairly similar. I mean, it's definitely the tech department, the tech director, that is going to be the main person responsible for that, and so that's typically the main kind of point of contact, the main decision maker. And there's probably other lower level people that'll help transact and facilitate it. Purchasing procurement definitely can get involved and play a small role, but The tech department, the tech directors are definitely the main decision makers. There's
Hmm.
not a ton of other, I guess, compliance and other watchdogs as much, I don't think. So I think that would maybe be
Yeah.
the one big difference is kind of a lot of times it's just the tech department going out and, trying to get the best price and for those assets. So it's not a ton of other involvement. It does involve purchasing though, bid and like, well, hey, how much money you're going to get back for these devices? How much can we afford to spend on the new technology based on how much you expect to get back. So,
Yeah. And uh, from an organization standpoint, Gary, I know you have some the business units that is high school or the high school. Then you have all sorts of stakeholders around them that sort of are involved in decision making, whether it's the county, the school district, the state. How do you navigate all these stakeholders? Who do you deal with? Do you deal with all of them because they all have some kind of an oversight or they touch the school somehow?
mhm. Yeah, it's a good question, and it really kind of depends state by state, quite a bit, and district by district, the best approach and avenue to go through, and depends somewhat on the size of the deal too, on how you want to approach that and who you want to go through. So it can be difficult to navigate. I think my team has done a good job, or they do a good job of trying to keep as many of them involved and aware of who we are and what we do as many of those key decision makers throughout the entire process.
You do confirm that decision making is not centralized. I mean, it could be that you have to deal with a school district, the school itself, the state, the
Right.
county. It's all over the map.
Yeah, it is all over the map. I mean, for the most part, it's not as much of a state mandated thing. There's a couple of states that really will determine, but for the most part, it is, a district level type of authorization. So,
Yeah, and that's the case for both public and private schools, or they behave differently.
yeah, no, that's typically the case for both.
Mhm, mhm.
Yep.
In the beginning, you did mention that one kid showed up in your store with a tablet that belongs to the school, but was requesting help. You know, if that happens in an enterprise, that and that would be caught by someone, that would be a big scandal, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it is a bit disappointing, but yes, certainly schools are very, very price focused, and they are thinking less. They've thought less about the data security. It's probably a third on the list. I would say pricing is most important. Logistics and ease would be second, and then data security is third. There are schools that are, starting to think about that more and thinking about, to your point, the cyber risk and the data exposure of those devices. Um, but it's a minority. If you look at even some of the RFPs that are out there, some of them are now starting to require companies to be R2 or e-stewards. But it's still, far less than half. I'll tell you that. I mean, it may be 10, 15, 20%. It's growing, but it's still not, very popular yet. It's unfortunate. They just tend, schools just tend to move slower, right, on technology adoption and whether it's taking a look at AI and VR and AR. I mean, they're way behind where a lot of businesses will be, and they're probably more along the lines of a slower moving consumer. So I think it will be a growing trend. It'll just take more and more articles coming out about data that was leaked and cybersecurity issues that schools are having. I think the awareness will certainly grow. I mean, that's part of the reason why we've been R2 certified for several years now to get ahead of it because we thought schools would be really preferring that. And to your point, there's not as much data on a lot of these Chromebooks or tablets, but there is data on there. Very frequently, there is some sensitive data on those devices, especially teacher and admin type of units. But also, you could have student data as well, which in a different way, there's an important responsibility to make sure that data is erased properly. So yeah, so it's unfortunate, but we're seeing that more and more. And And I don't know if schools realize this, but the more they focus on price, the more it forces a lot of companies in the space to cut corners in ways, right? It's just, if you think about it, anything that you as a consumer try to buy for the cheapest possible and you drive the price down, what always happens? The quality goes down, right? I mean, you can't you can't get a good meal at a restaurant and expect the price to be super cheap. It just doesn't make sense. And so you get these schools that are just so focused on price and they're just not thinking, well, hey, where could the quality go wrong? Well, maybe it's in data erasure, maybe it's in responsible recycling with plastics in those cases, or damaged devices. Well, maybe those are going into a landfill. They're not thinking about that as much yet. There are some, but it's definitely the minority, as I mentioned.
Yeah, and I think this is related to this environment of a very constrained and limited budget,
Right.
and particularly in public settings, a lot less in private schools, probably, certainly
Sure.
in
Yeah.
public schools. That affects everything else, right? That affects not only that, but that affects the choice of, IT managers that you hire, technical staff that you hire, lack of compliance officers or presence of compliance officers who know what to do. I'm not
Yeah.
really necessarily blaming the schools for being where they are. In fact, I mean, if you recall Morgan Stanley, that's a company that spent over $7 billion in IT,
Right.
and yet spends almost not much in
Right.
disposition of that IT. If a company that sophisticated manages to do the wrong thing, I mean, how can one expect a public school to do better?
Right.
That's a tough one.
Totally.
And so it goes back to budget. What's your business model? Let me, if you could sort of help us think of sort of the upstream and the downstream. The upstream being origination, where you get your devices. The
Hmm.
downstream is where you place them in the secondary market after going
Sure.
through that process of refurbishing, cleaning,
Hmm.
etc.
Yeah.
How does that sort of market environment works for you?
Right. So we get all the devices, obviously we're a reuse ITAD company. A lot of people call us, like a buyback company. So we're going in and paying schools, typically for the devices that we buy back, almost always, right? And so, school districts are where those devices generally originate. Now we are doing more work with businesses as well. But that's where we're getting those devices from, like I said, all over the US. And then we'll bring them back into our facility, data wipe them, clean them, refurbish them. We do have repair capabilities, as I mentioned earlier, to fix up some of the devices. MacBooks or higher end devices are worth fixing and putting parts and labor into, where a Chromebook, generally speaking, isn't worth doing much more than maybe a simple key replacement on. And then from there, we're reselling as much as we can direct to consumer, because that's generally where the highest recovery value is. And we need to be very strong at selling direct to consumer so that we can be competitive on the buy side, right, and bring in more of that product from the school districts. So we're selling on Amazon, eBay, Walmart, Newegg, Rebelow. There's tons of different platforms that we're on. I think we're on 15 or 16 platforms now. Amazon Renewed is certainly the biggest and most well-known platform out there, and they do a pretty good job overall. And that's where a good amount of our volume is going. Now we do have international buyers as well, especially on some of the lower grade material, where those countries may be looking for a cheaper price point and okay with a device that has cosmetic blemishes and dents and dings and that sort of thing. So we're selling into really all countries across the globe, a lot into Europe and Australia, but some into Middle East and Asian areas as well, Canada, Mexico. And then we have other retailers here and other reseller partners that we work with quite a bit too, that will maybe sell some refurbished devices back in the education market, or they'll sell parts to school. So we have a really diverse remarketing customer base. So there's a lot of different customers there, and then the origination of the devices is really all coming out of the K-12 sector, both from a direct standpoint and then some other channel partners that we use to bring in that product. So,
And you do have also schools that would take those devices, maybe schools that are even more budget sensitive, and maybe more prone to buying products that have already been used the past 3, 4, 5 years.
We do. We do. We don't sell as much directly into schools. We work with a lot of partners that do a lot of that type of work.
Okay.
It's a small amount of what we do, but yes, we do get that. And I think more and more now you're seeing schools with these budget issues, like we talked about earlier, where they need to push these devices out for another year, and then they are definitely looking at refurb devices to help them get through that other year. So,
Yeah, yeah, that makes
mhm.
sense. Yeah. And
Yeah.
talk to me a little bit about the products that you see. And what do you see coming up in the horizons?
Yeah, so most schools now have Chromebooks, right? So it's about 60% of the market
Really?
is
60%?
Chromebooks. Yeah, in the K-12 space, somewhere around there. Yeah, so it's Chromebooks one. Apple still has, 15 to 20% market share in iPads, mostly some MacBooks as well. And then you got the Windows type of devices and Surfaces that kind of make up the balance of those. So yeah, so we're seeing a lot of Chromebooks that are like HP G8 Chromebook if you're in the education space and you see that model. Or Dell 3100 Chromebook. So they're typically about 4 to 5 years old on the Chromebook side that we're seeing. And then on the Apple side, we're seeing a lot of iPad 7 and iPad 8, which is also about the same, age. 3 to 5 years is very typical for what we see. The older devices really aren't our target to remember, right? So an older Chromebook, there's not going to be enough reuse value in them where it even makes sense for us to buy them back. It turns into more of a recycle type of device once it starts to hit 6 or 7 years. So that is the bit of a challenge that we have is too many schools pushing out those refreshes and holding on to the devices until they're really falling apart because Chromebooks aren't built to last for the most part unless schools do a great job taking care of them with the right casing for more than 4 or 5 years, which is a bit of an issue. Google did extend the AUE or the software life of a Chromebook, the auto update expiration on all of the Chromebooks to give plenty of time now, but the devices just simply don't last that long. So that's kind of the big issue that I think schools are running into. It's a lot of ongoing maintenance and a big maintenance challenge on those devices versus the Apple products that actually tend to hold up quite a bit better and have a much better residual value at end of life.
And on the Chromebook, you've talked about the operating system and the software side. How is the Chromebook an easy device to refurbish or re-up and fix and put out there?
Yeah, it is. It is a pretty easy device to fix. Easier than most of the Apple devices for sure. Um, the challenge is that they just don't hold up very long, right? So you're having to fix multiple things that are going wrong with them. It's a plastic device, right? So you're going to get a lot of issues that are happening as a result of that. It's just not holding up that well, and the components internally just are not as strong either. So it is easier to fix, and if you want to stand up a repair program like a lot of schools have, where they're fixing these devices in-house, and sometimes having kids or other staff doing them, you can do it. It's just a lot to manage. I mean, it's almost like a business itself to manage a whole little internal repair department. So in schools with a lack of time that a lot of these tech directors have, it's tough for them to be able to stand up a program and manage a program effectively. Some have definitely done it. But yeah, so that's the challenge. And then otherwise, you have to really outsource a lot of the repairs to a third party. And there's a lot of good repair companies out there. Like we used to do a lot of it, but there's a fair amount of them out there now that are strong and they're affordable, but it still adds up for the school with how often these devices are breaking down, certainly.
Yeah, yeah. And how is competition? I know initially when you talked about sort of getting into the repair business, it became very crowded.
Yeah.
Is it the case for the business you're in right now, the ITAD education sector?
Yeah, yeah, it is, especially in the K-12 market where, as we talked about the price focus, you have a lot of these kind of smaller little shops opening up out of their garage. They don't have any certifications or anything, but they have like a lean and mean crew of just flipping out, products. So there's been a decent amount of those groups that have came on board. But yeah, it's gotten to be a pretty competitive market, especially over the last 4 or 5 years. When we first got into it, we were like one of the few companies that were buying back Chromebooks. Everybody was like, "What? You can actually pay for those," and then people started to realize that there was good enough reuse value on them, especially like you said, back into education or for parts, and then even consumers online would still buy them to save. Instead of buying a new one for a couple hundred, $250, you could buy a refurbished one for $89.99 on Amazon, and consumers were happy with that. And so it was in those early days. There's a lot less competition. Then other companies started to realize that there was some good value in that, and so it's gotten way more competitive on the Chrome side, and then the Apple side has been competitive, definitely for a few years, 3 or 4 years now. There's a big secondary market globally, and then reselling on Amazon, eBay, and those channels is no secret. So there's a fair amount of competition in the market, and with it being price focused, it's gotten kind of crowded because of that, because there's not a ton of differentiators that schools are valuing at this point, which in a lot of ways is an opportunity, I think, for the companies like us to market better. To our discussion point earlier, it's not, the schools are on limited budgets, and so they can hardly afford people with the right current experience, but to really put in a good ITAD program and focus on data destruction, it's a tall task for them. It's an education piece for us, right? Like we need to do a better job. All of us professional ITAD companies, if I could group us into that into that group, would we need to market. We need to market better and help schools understand the importance of data destruction, responsible recycling, using a partner that is thinking about the environment and the longevity in the environment, not just trying to make every single dollar or cent they can right now, and they're taking care of their people, right? So you've seen a huge push from an ESG standpoint marketed to businesses. Schools, not so much yet. So I think there's a big opportunity to market and improve the marketing of those things, so schools understand.
Yeah,
And I
no,
think in the long
I
run they
agree. I
will.
think the current thinking is how do you take the ITAD industry and pivot from a commodity like to an industry that's more driven by services that are
Right.
premium that you would charge your customers. Now, of course, between ESG and AI and all and data security, that narrative is starting to get traction in the enterprise space, in the public sector, particularly in the education sector, particularly in the K-12. The story is not there yet, and so
Hmm.
how do you get there? I think in your case, you're still very much focused on spending money upfront to try to make some profitability down. But how is that margin? Because you're committing money in advance before putting it into the market, and you have all sorts of costs that you incur during that process,
Hmm.
all the way to putting it into the market and hoping that you're actually making a profit that
Hmm.
allows you to pay for salaries and etc. How
Hmm.
is that margin, by the way? I mean, do you feel comfortable? Does it go up and down based on economic conditions? How
Yeah.
volatile is it?
Yeah, it can be fairly volatile for sure, and that's a challenge that we have in this business. We watch the market very closely and try to get a ton of intelligence on what those devices are moving for. And now, we're a very data rich company, so we have a ton of historical data and forecasting on what we expect prices to do. So we have a pretty good idea of what iPad prices are going to do starting in the summer months, right? A lot of them coming out, not as much demand, and then there's a bit of a uptick going into the holiday season always. So we have a lot of historical demand, or historical data on that, I should say, to help us do a good job forecasting and really trying to stay in touch with the market. And then forecasting certainly isn't perfect, but it helps give you a pretty good start to that. So we've gotten better at it. But yeah, the nature of the K-12 market and our business, it is it is a tighter margin, high volume type of business, right? And so that's why we're very focused on, hey, how can we put through, 400,000 or 500,000 assets through our building and stay lean and mean as an organization to help to help grow that volume. And all of our competitors are as well, and to do it right without cutting corners at the same time. So I think it's important, I think, for the long term of the industry for companies like us to definitely be more service focused, to your point, much less transactional. I think it'll definitely take additional marketing and leadership to push that. Unfortunately, the industry has operated that way for a number of years now, and so I could see it changing. I think it'll be a slow process because schools are used to working one way now. But I think there are schools that do work with partners in a less transactional way, but it's not a ton. So I think it'll take some time, but that will hopefully change in the industry.
Yeah, hopefully it will for sure. And I think the pressure points are different than what you see in the enterprise. In the enterprise is all these guys that are working in different environments, the compliance, the legal guys, the facilities management. I mean, it's a lot of people within in the public sector school, particularly in the public sector. It's different stakeholders that need to be educated, right? It's folks in the legislation, it's folks in the government and the state and the county. That's a very difficult ecosystem of people to approach and to engage. It's very costly, and I think to your point, that would require an industry-wide effort as opposed to one company trying to do it. I mean, you could start sort of the process, but you still need the backing of what you consider being your competitors. But in this case, the pie grows, and
Right.
that everybody gets something out of it. Uh, to your best knowledge, what's the size of this market? And I don't mean necessarily a number. If
Hmm.
you look at your region, where you are most active, uh, are there schools that are doing absolutely nothing, or you would assume that all school districts, or most of them, are pretty much using the types of services that you guys are offering?
Yeah. I think most are. I think it's probably 80 to 90%. I don't have any specific numbers, but
It's
it's
a
a
big
pretty high
number.
percentage. I think a lot of schools are using more kind of like a traditional e-waste recycler, though, especially on the Chromebook side, where well, I shouldn't say most, but there's a lot of schools that are still using those recyclers to get rid of their assets. Sometimes they do have value to them, and they could use a company like ours. Other times they really are, just a recyclable type of device. Um, so, I do think it's up there. There was earlier on, I mean, I heard stories of, schools that were just putting iPads in a dumpster. As crazy as it sounds, working iPads, they didn't know how to get rid of them. But I don't hear, you don't hear that anymore at this point. So I think most of them are using, mostly compliant recycling or ITAD type of solutions like us. So
And for you guys being certified by, in this case, R2, does that give you at least a competitive edge that you feel is working for you, or certifications is something you have to do because everybody's doing it?
well, I was hoping it would give us a bit of an edge, but in the market, schools haven't valued it enough. I
Right.
think it does in certain cases give us a bit of an edge, but it's not like a game changer,
Gotcha.
certainly. I think in the enterprise and healthcare and government type sectors, I think it's you have to have that along with NAID and some other certifications, right? So I think it's a barrier of entry there that you have to have in order to work with those type of places. But with schools, um, not yet. But that's again a marketing challenge for us and hopefully all the other R2V3 companies out there. But there's a lot more R2V3 or R2 certified companies than there were when we first got it. Too. I think when we first
Mm.
got it, there was maybe only 500 or 600. Now There's a little over 1,000. I'm not sure exactly how many are in the U.S., but most of them. There's got to be 800 R2 companies now. So it's gone up quite a bit. So it's a little bit less of a competitive edge and turning into more of a necessity, I think, but just not as valued in the education market quite yet.
Yeah, yeah. What's the role of the OEMs? I know OEMs, and I've worked with a number of them, and a lot of them have actually entities and departments that cater specifically to the education market, but it's mostly selling to the education market, not on the end of life. Do you guys have relationships with the likes of Google, HP, Dell, or not, or they're not really there? They're there essentially to sell new products.
Yeah, so they're really focused on the sales of new products. I mean, that's what the OEMs have been focused on for a while. But I would say for sure in recent years, many of them have spoke up and said, yeah, we want to help with this issue. And I think it's especially on the Chromebook side where they are aware that these devices aren't really they're not lasting that long, so they're not getting a second life in a lot of cases. Um, through companies like us, and they're worried about them winding up in landfills and just getting trashed. And there's a risk of that, certainly. So I think that they're worried about their brand and the reputation there. And if they can try to help control some of that life cycle, that back end, I think they're interested in that just to make sure it's compliant and everything as well. So they're getting, they're starting to be more and more aware of it, and some consumers I think have been pushing back on them to play a bigger role. But a lot of times, like for example, Lenovo has started a buyback program and an authorization of a select group of people to buy back devices, and same with some of the other OEMs. So they have a partner. A lot of them have a bit of a partner network, but it's not pushed as much
Not
yet.
advanced,
But
yeah.
it's a newer thing for them. So they're still trying to figure out how to navigate that. Google had a buyback solution at one point, but it like with a portal to help schools and other people sell devices back, and it was like partner network where they set up a portal, but they haven't done that lately. So mostly it's just going to fall back on the OEMs, and in particular I think it's most important for the laptop OEMs to play a role in that, the HP, Dell, Lenovo, Acer group. So there's a lot of opportunity to expand that, to your point, though. I
Yeah,
think I think they will.
yeah, I agree with you. I think right now it's been a fairly archaic, uh, response from the OEMs. But as producer responsibility laws kick in, they will have to be a lot more proactive. They'll be hesitant, but they have to be extremely proactive. Now, as you're moving from this environment of a very specific environment to an enterprise environment, I noticed in the beginning you mentioned that so this is your first foray into the enterprise space. Um, what are you discovering? What are you learning as you look at big enterprise? And you said you already have customers in the business sector.
Mhm.
How do you compare and contrast the two? I mean, there's a lot to talk about, but let's go with a 30,000 foot view, if you don't mind.
So what we're learning is that, and I kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, that price is not, even top two or three most important. It really is about data and data destruction that they care most about, and then it's other services that they want assistance with, different than the K-12 sector, and they want to build a good long-term relationship and partnership. Um, which is exciting for us. It's they don't want to have to go find another, a different ITAD company every 3 or 4 years. I'd rather get into a consistent partnership with somebody they trust. They get in a good rhythm to get the data destruction certifications that they need, or have access to a portal to view the information that they need. So it's more of a programmatic long-term approach, very different than the transactional side of working in the K-12 sector. So I would say that's kind of like the most, the biggest change that we've seen, which is exciting as well. I would say they definitely also want somebody to help with everything they have. They don't want just a company to just take their good stuff. They want help with all the recycling,
Yeah.
traditional e-waste at the same time. For the most part, not all of them, but they don't want to have two different partners and two different throats to choke, if you will, if something happens. They want
Of
one
course.
center, point of liability and one control there and one partner that they're working with to take the printers and the batteries and all of that back along with the phone, the cell phones they have, or the laptops and desktops and the reuse there. So it's a little bit different. Schools are okay with having like kind of like a recycling e-waste partner and then selling off their good assets. And only some businesses are willing to do that. And typically, I feel like it's on the smaller end of companies that are willing to do that. The bigger ones are at least medium and larger are certainly looking for one partner to work with.
And I'm assuming this is where your R2 certification will come into play,
Yeah, yeah,
more
absolutely.
recognition.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too that enterprise is also looking for is, looking at carbon emission and carbon, credits and carbon savings. That's different. We never get that from school districts, right? They're not asking us for a report out of what that will look like. So, and I'm seeing, you're starting to see like even software solutions out there now that are like, along with the data erasure certificate, will provide that sort of data, or third parties that help you calculate what that looks like. So that's a different change, and it goes into the whole, like we talked about earlier, difference in ESG and how important it is right now for businesses and compared to
Yeah.
school districts at this point. So
So how prepared are you you tackle sort of the large enterprise, or go beyond sort of your comfort zone of of schools? What do you anticipate would be sort of the difficulties and the challenges you'll be facing going forward?
yeah, I think we are pretty prepared, but there's definitely things that we need to be ready for. Kind of like I mentioned earlier, I feel like we're built for long-term partnerships and programs. We have our R2 certification. We have NetSuite as an ERP, so we've got like the best cloud-based ERP there is that's custom built, and we can continue to customize that. We have a really great team, a really great foundation. We use the entrepreneurial operating system, or EOS, in our business, which has been really good to help us uh, cast a clear vision, stay on track for our goals. So I feel like from a foundation standpoint, we're in a really good place. Now, when it comes into handling e-waste and recycling, historically we've just used a partner for that type of work, and we've got a really good partnership there. But I think we'll need to have to take that to a step, to another step. We'll have to be prepared to offer additional services for businesses. Could be on-site data destruction, could be help with decommissioning some servers and that sort of thing. And we've got some room to grow on that side. Certainly, I think I have a lot of the right people, but we haven't done as much of that. We've been very focused on mobile device reuse. So I think there's some work that we'll have to do there. But like I said, I think we got the right foundation to work off of, which is exciting. Obviously we're doing some of this work already. It's
Of
just,
course.
making it more and more of a focus and being prepared for that. We'll have a little bit of work to do, but I feel good about it.
Scalability, I mean, you could scale if demand all of a sudden, becomes big and relevant.
Yeah, yeah, I feel good about it. We've got 70,000 square foot facility here, that we own, that we can expand some into. I feel like we've got the right leadership team, the right people to expand, the ERP to expand off of. I think geographically there would be a challenge there depending on, how far away we're starting to work with some of these larger enterprise accounts, where we may have to expand geographically, of course, because logistics on the e-waste product is going to be a problem if you're hauling it back from California, right? So we'll have to either have a really good partner network or expand there. But I feel pretty good about that. Thankfully, my partners and I have had quite a bit of experience scaling and growing different businesses. Mentioned the one business. We also had a parts distribution company that we scaled, called Mobile Defenders. It did did quite well in that business too. So definitely some learnings that we'll have, but feel pretty good about our capabilities to scale.
Yeah, I think you guys, if you start within your geography,
Right,
I think it probably would be easier to sort of grow organically from there, as
right,
opposed to your point trying to go to Florida or California or
right.
whatever, or Alaska, that would be
Yeah.
very, very difficult for sure. You've talked about enterprise class hardware. I'm assuming this is not the case in public sector schools or in schools. Schools, what you guys do is essentially your mass market devices, mostly PC clients,
Right.
tablets, these kinds of form factors. We're not talking about servers and data centers. It's not something that you see in schools.
Yeah, no, not very much. No, it's mostly those consumer type devices. Now there are some, there's definitely some networking gear and other things, but right now, as an organization, we haven't been focused on that. We've just said, hey, we want your reused material, and schools are okay with that, and selling it back to us because they know they're going to get a lot more money than working with a traditional recycler, and so it's been okay to do that. As we expand our capabilities because we need to in the enterprise space. I think we will see some more of that, but it's still going to be a majority of those, those consumer devices that we already talked about.
We hear all these buzzwords, which most of them are real serious topics: ESG, artificial intelligence, obviously data security. Is it something that concern you? Are you worried about AI, how it will impact you? I am worried personally. I'm concerned about the rapid development that's taking place, not necessarily just the impact. The
Mhm.
impact, if it's done in a logical way over a certain period of time, I think we adjust. But the way things are jumping and moving into our world is
Yeah.
making me very concerned. Any of this related to your work make you
hmm
sort of worried?
hmm Yeah, it's a good question. It's moving so fast, as you mentioned, right? It's growing so quickly. I get worried that I'm just not spending enough time to understand all of the evolution and changes that are happening and trying to make sure I'm on top of everything because it is moving quick. So I'm worried that I'm missing something, I guess, there. But the thing is, I don't worry as much about the education sector because of how slow the education sector is to move and adopt. And
Right.
so there probably will be time for us, especially living on the back end, right, of a lot of these type of transactions, and 3 to 5 years later after the school purchases the devices, that we live there. It's interesting. I'm still hunting for the information to see, how schools are going to implement AI. Chrome has some kind of like Google has some cloud-based type solutions. I don't see them probably being put on Chromebooks. I just don't have the capabilities from a processing standpoint to have them on those devices like you'd mentioned with some of the Windows type devices. But I think there will be a lot of AI used by admin and teachers. It's just I don't know how
Yes, of
long
course.
it's going to take for that to happen, but to analyze tests and essays and I don't know. There's just so many different applications of utilizing AI, probably using it too to make sure students are using AI to create and I know this is big in the college sector, but using to create all of their content and originate
Content, yeah.
it. But you know,
Turning that way would impact you as a facility owner or as a site. We know that number of engineering companies are redesigning the way a factory, for example, works. And I can imagine the immediate
mm,
implication on disassembly, on parts separation, on material separation, on the manufacturing process. That's
yeah,
that that's going to have a tremendous impact on operational things, issues.
yeah, yeah. I think so too. I think so. It's, in our world, one of the biggest things I've always really wanted was some better way to grade devices automatically using some sort of, AI or some sort of intelligence type system. Now it does exist on phones where, you can have a device cleaned by using robotics and then it'll take a series of pictures to determine the grade of that device. Kind of like baseball letter grading is very common in our industry, A, B, C, D, F, right? And so I think there could be some really good opportunities there to improve. There just hasn't been anything that's came out yet for the type of devices that we deal in. But yeah, I think there could be between AI and automation, there's going to be a lot of changes that happen. So yeah, my concern is just staying on top of it and being
Yeah.
first and early to the market. I don't want to be last to figure out something and that our competitors are starting to do, certainly. So we need to be cutting edge on that. So I need to make sure, especially as the visionary of the company, that I'm on top of that, right? Even for us too, it's like as an organization, how are we safely using a system like Chat GPT, to safely and efficiently using it, right? So it's a lot of teaching our team, well, hey, you need to be using this. Here's how you prompt it, and then here's what you shouldn't do, right? We don't want to upload sensitive, let's say, our P&L on there to have it analyzed by ChatGPT because I don't trust where that data could wind up, right? So I have some concerns around that. So we're actually putting in a policy internally right now on how to leverage ChatGPT in a safe way. So that's a important thing for us. So I do get a little bit worried about that. But the thing that worries me most is the unknowns right now, and
Yeah,
there
yeah,
seems to be a
absolutely.
lot of them.
A
So
lot of them, I mean, and it's moving at a fast pace. And by the way, you're not the only one who's worried about the impact of ChatGPT in the enterprise. In fact,
right.
a growing number of companies are favoring the adoption of micro applications that they can control locally and in an easy way, as opposed to sort of full deployment of AI across the entire data infrastructure or the data center or the IT infrastructure. So I agree with you. There's a lot of challenges, but changes are coming for sure. Changes are coming for sure, and I recommend everybody that I talk to actually pay attention, because uh, if you don't follow that trend and looking for path uh, to adoption, deployment, and management, you will eventually fall behind in terms of productivity and in terms of competitiveness.
Right.
I mean, these systems today are capable of doing much better predictive models than what the industry has been used to for the past 20,
Mhm.
30 years. There's a much better data analysis of the plans that you guys have in terms of where are the weaknesses, the strengths, where can you find optimum configurations in the system. Obviously, spectroscopy is one of the things that is going to be pushed for people that really care about separating material, for instance.
Mhm.
So and this is, as I said in my most recent podcast, this is not the realm of science fiction, Gary. And
Mhm.
this is not the realm of 3 years from now.
Right.
This is, as I said, happening now. And so definitely. So Gary, thank you so much for your, for coming today. I appreciate it. And hopefully we'll be doing more of those going forward.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me.